Boring but public details about how government agencies are structured, staffed, and funded mean citizens and Congress can hold those agencies accountable. The Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, though, does not seem to be following any of those rules. Federal News Network's Terry Gerton investigated the impact of that lack of clarity with the Project on Government Oversight's Faith Williams.
A new report from the Project on Government Oversight addresses the lack of visibility into how DOGE is officially structured. But Faith, why does that matter?
That's such a good question. It matters because its structure by design helps shield DOGE, both the actors and the actions of this entity. It shields it from accountability. It shields it from congressional accountability, from accountability to the public. That's why the structure of DOGE is so important.
Well, when it was initially created, it was created inside the U.S. Digital Service and sort of took it over from the inside out. Was that a sneaky, smart strategy to create some flexibility?
Right. The first executive order that established DOGE essentially took over the U.S. Digital Service and said, now you're renamed the Department of Government Efficiency, and now your purview is something a bit different. But it was still relatively narrow. It was focused on technology and technology transformation. But that first executive order also placed DOGE teams at agencies across the federal government as well. So DOGE would be in the White House, but also there would be these teams working closely with agency leads. I don't in and of itself think that is so unusual for a president of either party to roll out an executive order that then places people in agencies to help execute it. I've seen things like that before. So I don't think in and of itself it was supposed to be particularly sneaky, no. I just think that's where they started.
And part of that initial executive order was that DOGE was also supposed to submit a plan to reduce the size of the federal government's workforce through efficiency improvements and attrition. Certainly seen a lot of attrition. Has anybody seen that plan?
Gosh, I have not seen that plan. If such a plan exists, I'm sure a few people have seen it. One of the things that DOGE did early on, and even when I say what DOGE did, it leads to questions. So who is DOGE? Where is DOGE? And I think what I mean by this in particular was what Elon Musk, the de facto head of DOGE, did early on was work closely with President Trump to install some of his close allies, and some of Trump's close allies too, of course, in the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, which helps set HR policy for the whole government. And we've also seen its mandate or scope expand with executive order. And so those two, to me, tie closely together because they gave immediately off the bat this idea of let's make government more efficient, let's cut it down, this extra power, because now we have folks very bought into the DOGE mission, if not directly attached to DOGE, sitting at OPM. And that happened very early.
And you mentioned the responsibility or the specific role for Elon Musk, but the executive orders said that there would be an administrator of DOGE that would report to the White House chief of staff. Is that Elon Musk or is that someone else?
So that appears to be someone else. After much back and forth and hemming and hawing, the White House announced that Amy Gleason would be the DOGE administrator. We've also seen in the news that Amy Gleason holds a full-time position at HHS, Health and Human Services. Again, on paper in and of itself, not necessarily so unusual. People can be dual-hatted, it happens. But DOGE is doing so much so quickly in so many places. Seeing that does raise a question to me of how is this person really both administering DOGE and doing this full-time work for an agency? But even stepping back from Amy Gleason being named, Elon Musk, I called him the de facto head of DOGE because President Trump has called him the head of DOGE numerous times, including in his address to Congress back in March. It happened before that, it's happened after that. But President Trump has absolutely linked DOGE with Elon Musk in a way that cannot be unlinked, even by naming someone else as the administrator.
What does that mean then in terms of who's ultimately responsible for what DOGE is doing or will do?
It means it's really complicated. And we've seen that play out in different lawsuits challenging actions that DOGE has taken. And the administration's ability to say it's Elon when we want it to be, and it's not Elon when we don't want it to be, has been a part of their strategy for all of this. It makes it more difficult to bring a challenge or to even say DOGE is doing this versus an agency is doing this. It makes it very challenging, and it's on purpose. I want to be like super clear about that, is the opacity of it all is purposefully done because it shields from accountability.
I'm speaking with Faith Williams. She's the Director of Effective and Accountable Government Programs at the Project on Government Oversight. So, Faith, let's pull that string a little bit. The report says that DOGE is operating in a gray zone for administration. Sometimes it functions like an agency, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes Elon Musk is in charge of it, sometimes he's not. And you just said it looks like that's a feature, not a bug. So explore for us a little bit more what it does mean for accountability and transparency.
Sure. So there's kind of two ways that I think about this issue. The first are the people working for DOGE. What we know at the moment is that this runs the gamut between special government employees, which is a kind of federal employee, and that's what Elon Musk is, according to the White House. So it kind of runs the gamut from that. There are people that are detailed to the agencies. There are people working in the White House for DOGE. There are people that are now working full-time in agencies. There are political appointees with close ties to DOGE. Is that the same as working for DOGE? No, but it's in the mix. It's in the climate, the environment of DOGE. Anyway, so there's the employee part. And then there's the actions that DOGE is taking. And I think that's the other piece when we talk about accountability. So DOGE has been a part of, and it's hard to know how much a part of sometimes, but it has been a part of things like dismantling USAID or CFPB. And I'm like acronym souping us. So it's been a part of these really big decisions happening in the executive branch. Decisions that I would argue are up to Congress. Because Congress authorizes and funds an agency, Congress also has the right to close an agency or to direct the president to close an agency, and that has not happened here. So where am I going with all of this? Essentially, the difficulty in knowing what DOGE does versus what someone else does, and the difficulty of knowing who is DOGE makes it really hard to say things like, when DOGE closed that agency, it was against the law. It makes that sentence hard to prove. Mm-hmm. I'm not a lawyer, to be clear. I'm not a judge, and I'm not necessarily trying to make a legal case here, but it makes that sentence really hard.
One of the other aspects about transparent government operations is being able to track the funding. Your report indicates it's not particularly clear where DOGE's funding is coming from, and surely they're not all working for free.
Surely they're not all working for free. I would imagine that as well. I believe it was ProPublica worked to identify, it was nearly $40 million of funding, and this was a few weeks ago at least, was heading to DOGE. And a good example of DOGE acting in an agency gray zone is this. The law that the White House used to take money from some agencies and give it to DOGE is a law used for fiscal transfer between two agencies, not necessarily between an agency and a gray zone, if that makes sense, or between an agency and a group of people. So if DOGE is an agency, then that transfer of money, at least on the face, at least initially, is perfectly fine, perfectly legal. And if they're an agency in that sense, then they should be keeping their records, for example. Their employees should be held to, it should be more clear who's working there. So there's implications for ethics and conflicts of interest that come into play as well. If you're an agency, if you're not an agency, if you're a special government employee, or if you're a full-time government employee, things like that.
Well, those issues around conflict of interest and ethics also apply to the individuals. Federal employees have to disclose conflicts of interest. They have to file financial disclosures. Is any of that happening with the people who work for DOGE?
Some of that is happening, and it hasn't always been public. It's been hard to get our hands on some of that information. But some of it is happening. But an interesting case in point of Elon Musk himself as a special government employee, the rules for special government employees are just a little bit different. While you normally have ethics officials applying these rules, right? They are the experts on these rules. They work with administrations. We have the White House press secretary saying essentially that Elon Musk will police himself for conflicts of interest, which just doesn't make a great deal of sense to me, just as a thinking person. And then we also have an Office of Government Ethics that has been decapitated. Its head was fired. So you're in this situation where the constraints around ethics have been weakened. And you also have this cloud of what do these people need to adhere by? By what rules do these folks need to adhere? And that's a really potent brew, I think.
So as we think about what DOGE will look like in the future, I mean, we've seen within government sort of an ad hoc committee to deal with an urgent issue, and either the issue gets resolved or the committee settles into a more permanent structure. What do you think the future is for DOGE? Is it more ephemeral, or is it ultimately going to wind up as sort of a more fixed piece of the government bureaucracy?
Here's what I think is going to happen. So the executive order establishing DOGE puts it running through July 4th, 2026. So it's like an 18-month kind of tenure. And for whom does that